Of course, my name is Tim Carter, and this is a review of the lesson I am KOINE, a lesson for Calvinists and Arminians. This review will focus on two verses, obviously, and it is about the focus on kind of action according to the KOINE, common KOINE language of our New Testament. And this was from a beginner's grammar of the Greek New Testament by a man named William Davis. He was the professor of interpretation at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. On page 25, he said the main idea of tense, as in tense, mood, voice, person, and number, the things of fully conjugating a verb. It says is kind of action. Kind of action. He said present tense is continual, linear, or durative action. And then page 78. I should have this stuff marked next time. Yes, page 78, he says there's another kind. It's the simplest form of action. Remember that, the simplest form of action. And then, of course, this is in the King James English, this one on the left. So this is directly out of the King James. And it says that kind of action is in its simplest form called aorist. Now you can look this up. Now this little book is available online, I believe in a PDF format. I think you can get that for free. If you go to Internet Archives, they have things like that. And then of course blueletterbible.org and all these other free things. Now support them if you can. But it says the aorist tense treats this kind of action is called punctular. And that's in the other video, that is the primary video. I'm only using this one to focus on the text that has to do with believe and believing. So you notice King James brought out the ing here and then brought out the simplest form, which was believe. And the point of that lesson was this, but still is this, is that in this trying to reconcile Calvinism and Arminianism, which it's ridiculous as far as I'm concerned, it was easier for me to study the time people invest in argumentation, which is really to try to make ideas that men formulated in their heads, whatever. I really don't have time for that. But going to the KOINE to find out just what does the Bible teach, it says that this is distinguished here, believe and believing. And then the same writer in 1 John 5:1 wrote about everyone who is believing. Now this is not the King James translation, but this is exactly the same verb and tense here. And you say, well, why would that be different? Why would a translator not be consistent? Well, this was not the same person. Remember, there were 54 people translated our common English text, and that's not what this lesson is about. But it's just to say that from the KOINE New Testament, we have irrefutable expression and language. The argument of Calvinism and Arminianism doesn't exist in the Scriptures. That is, it's not irreconcilable, and you'll see what problems that causes. A Calvinist might, if he's a student of Greek and cares to read it, might be real careful, and very careful as some are, to point out that believing that Jesus is the Christ is someone who has been generated, that is born out from the God previously, that is prior to believing. So they are correct. That is, the KOINE says that a person is born first. You see here, born, which is a lot simpler way of saying generated. Sometimes it says begotten, born here, born. That occurs prior to believing. So because of this perfect tense, has been generated, born is actually before believing. So at this point, Calvinists will say, well, there you go, I have it. I've shown that it precedes the believing. That's correct. However, born does not precede believe. In every text in John, in all the texts where the verb for generate appears in perfect tense, all of them show what happens after. I'm just focusing on the one but we don't need it anymore. We have this text here, this verse, and that verse. And it might help, let's say, if you could take a loose leaf Bible translation format and take 1 John out, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John out, and then place them at the end of John, and then have them all together. That might help you when you're witnessing to someone. It would have been very helpful had the translator that was careful here, they were very careful, whoever he was here, was very careful to show simple form of action. So we're going to allow the kind of action, the grammar tell us, is it true someone believes first, then is born again, and then is believing? The grammar says exactly that. No one can change the grammar. You don't have to go and buy books by John MacArthur, who advocates that this isn't the case. You don't have to go out and find out how will you argue with the Greek professors and these apologists today that are allowing Calvinism to override the grammar. You don't have to worry, well, what if this isn't right? Because I hear Calvinism and Arminianism, it's always cycling, and sometimes Calvinism is popular, sometimes Arminianism, and Baptists just kind of swing back and forth. You don't have to go anywhere. It's over. It's settled. There's nothing that you have to do. If your opinion of the Greek New Testament is the same as mine and all those who are believers, then you wouldn't go out and say that a person's not born again before they're believing, because you wouldn't have to, because you would be glad to say that the simplest form of action, punctular. There's a point, punctular. Thank God it's the simplest form. And then you say, well, Brother Carter, if it's true, well, the Greek New Testament is true. Even the King James points that out here and distinguishes these kinds of actions. It is true that the birth becomes before believing. But so if you take 1 John, this text, John's writing, and in that letter, he's putting the new birth ahead of believing. And then you move this letter this way, he puts the written things, these things, the gospel of John, these things that were written, that goes before believe. So you have the gospel, the written things, you have the simplest form of action, and a man is able to do that. Now, no man is able to be this. Now, you'll hear a lot of men, independently of the KOINE Greek text, the common language as it's expressed in such a very common, wordy, concrete, functional way. It's so painfully expressed. And you can ask teachers that really focus on this perfect tense, they may have just not really called your attention to this present tense, continual action. But I was graced with a teacher that really hammered that home, and I had a grammar book that really hammered that home. And Baptists are the reason why I know this today. Baptists are why I don't have to choose a theology called Calvinism or Arminianism, because this alone refutes both of them. Men try to explain, well, how does someone continue? One group had developed an idea that said, well, it's the responsibility to believe and then to keep on believing. Well, what does the new birth do? They don't know. But now preachers out there, famous Baptist preachers, have always taught and preached the gospel. Now, if someone just wants to ignore this, which I wouldn't blame a Calvinist for wanting to ignore this, nor an Arminian for wanting to ignore it, and that's okay, meaning a person who has an interest in supporting Calvinism or Arminianism, I don't have an interest in doing that. I'm happy to support this. That's why I call myself what the Greek New Testament is, KOINE, common. But notice, then what does this even mean? Why would even the King James translators, whom they're touted as being unsurpassed in their scholarship, that's wonderful. Well, what does it mean to say believe and then believing? And then why did John go to such great lengths to say this? Now, I'm really shocked, though, that the King James translators didn't translate this has been, because they are very high Calvinists. And then they were very inconsistent not bringing this out. But I still don't only use the King James as far as an English text, and I explain from the common. King James, very high level. But this was it. Punctular is the simplest form of action. Notice this, of action. Action. The simplest form. Thank God for that. Thank God for that. So, how able is a person, and what does God expect when the gospel is preached? The simplest form of action, to believe. Punctular action. Then the new birth, and then what no one could otherwise do is believing. Men try to give people good reasons. One man said, well, if you teach them how important it is to continue to be believing, they won't quit believing, implying that their ultimate entrance into heaven depended upon their, from within themselves, to sustain the exertion to continue to be believing. What did the new birth do? The new birth is why a person is continually believing. Not because they were somehow mystically, without the gospel, without preaching, without the simplest form of action. I don't know what that's called, except mysticism, I suppose. But anyway, this was the lesson. This was the review. You can watch this. It's a lot more simple. But when you bring these two together, John's not contradicting. Matter of fact, look how this worked out. He has believe here, this verse, the way I've written it, believe, born, and believing. So yes, it's true. No man is able to be believing that Jesus is the Christ unless he's first been generated, born out from God. And no one will believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, unless the gospel is preached. Now, that's it. It's irrefutable. It's indisputable. It's not Tim Carter's ideas. It's not, I read a Calvinist book somewhere, or I read an Arminian book somewhere. It's not that I read a commentary somewhere. This is Bible only. And that's why you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, don't be a Bible only. Be a sola scriptura, Bible alone. Well, I tell you what, even for those who believe in Bible alone and then other things, then this trumps everything else. Trumps the creeds, the confessions, that is, the creeds and confessions that don't teach this. And it is true. You say, well, what's the implications? Well, it means that since this says that the simplest form of action is what is expected, because this was the purpose that you might this. The purpose of the gospel was to achieve this simplest form of action. That expectation is there. Well, since that's the case, nothing about Calvinism is true about all that they can then co-depend upon belief being after the new birth. And since this is true, believing because of the new birth, nothing that Arminianism teaches about this ceasing is true, which co-depends upon not attributing to the new birth the continuation of believing. So I could make it more simple, but this is the most simple expression of KOINE. So yes, my theology is KOINE. I'm not Calvinist. I'm not Arminian. I am KOINE. I'm a Baptist, and my theology is KOINE. So you enjoy this. This was just a review. I'll upload this, and you can read this. But when you look at this one, you can go back. But there is nothing to talk about any further. Now I'll be having interviews with people in the future about the implications of this. Those will be online as well. Thanks.